what we're going to do is give a presentation because we're going to introduce what sociocracy is. So we're going to share some potentially new concepts. Um, Hopefully, you find it interesting. We're going to talk about sociocracy in democratic education, and sociocracy is as a method of governance, and a way to include all the voices and create child-friendly environments. So, just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll briefly talk about Wandering School, our project, and film School Circles, um, a little intro to democratic education and sociocracy, and then we'll show a video clip from our film, which shows consent decision making with children in practice. And then we'll go into some detail about sociocracy in schools, and then hopefully have some time for questions and reflections. Okay, so you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Wandering School, our project. I think Stephanie already did a brilliant job introducing us. So just would like to say a few words again about it. So it's a independent research project that we created in 2016 to investigate and support a liberating education, as we call. And we got that term from Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator. He's our main uh, inspiration to talk about liberating education, but also John Dewey, Eric Fromm, who brings discussions on freedom. And then we have José Pacheco here in Portugal, in Brazil. Many educators inspire us to create this theoretical base of the project. And we visit schools and learning communities wherever we are, whenever we can, to learn from them and then share their practices with the world. And we've been doing this mainly through documentation of these projects, and we also been mapping them and creating videos about those practices to illustrate to more people how democratic liberating education could work. And then more recently, we start offering courses and mentoring to schools to implement more democratic education. And we hope to reach state schools in that purpose. So we're gonna talk a bit about School Circles film. This film is a case study of 6 democratic schools in the Netherlands that practice sociocracy. And our motivation to do this film was basically we were visiting many democratic schools, and I also worked with democratic meetings with the students when I was a teacher here in Brazil. And we identify some challenges with majority voting, which are not always present, but quite often. Um, and one of those issues of majority rule that we've seen is segregation between two groups and polarization, as we see also in our democratic scenario all over the world, and competition and exclusion of minorities, which a lot of the time have a lot to contribute and offer to the proposals, and a lot of the time majority rules are not able to include those voices in decision making process. And another thing that was interesting, we also noticed that what happens in a few situations that we experience, and again when I was also in the classroom doing this with the students, was the majority rules sometimes can reinforce the status quo, reproduce the status quo, because we all know what we already know, and we live in a conditioned culture. So all these impact our opinions. And for example, when I was working with the students in the state school here in Brazil and doing democratic meeting, we had a lot of conflicts in the classroom. And when I asked the children what we could do to solve those issues, they very often would propose punishments and horrible punishments. And I was mainly the only one, and eventually with other smaller group of students, defending that we should try a different approach and based on dialogue and expressing our feelings and our needs, and try a more charismatic communication for us to deal with issues. But then I thought, wow, it's just a minority that is problematizing this kind of solution based on punishment. And when we went to Summer Hill School in the UK, we also seen a very harsh punitive justice system, and we were wondering how we can overcome this punitive justice system. And in 2015, we got to know sociocracy in a course that we did, and we kind of connected the points and wondered, are there any schools that practice sociocracy, and would sociocracy help with those issues that we identified? And we knew that sociocracy as a method of governance was created in the Netherlands, and Charlie will talk more about that in a bit, about the history. So we started looking for schools in the Netherlands, and we found 12 schools, and we managed to film 6 of them. So anyone who is interested in the film, you can go to our website. It's here underneath the poster, schoolcirclesfilm.com. And there you can find access to watch the film on Vimeo and also organize screenings. You can also find more information about the courses that we're offering. So. And to start this conversation about sociocracy, it's important. Many people ask, but what is the difference between sociocracy and democracy? Are they contradictory? Do they coexist? So we would like to start presenting the etymology of the words democracy and sociocracy, so you can see by yourselves what is the commonalities and between them. So democracy comes from the word in Greek demos and kratos, and demos mean people, the mass of people, and kratos mean power or rule. So democracy means the power of the people, right? And sociocracy comes from socios and kratos as well, so power and rule of the socios. And socios are the companions or the colleagues. And this because sociocracy depends on smaller groups to make decisions, but those groups, they are interconnected, and there is transparency in the whole organization, and everyone is involved in decision making. But because all the voices need to be heard in the process, you rely on smaller groups to be able to hear everyone. We're going to talk a bit more about how those groups are connected. So the way we like to see sociocracy as a way to achieve democracy, which is here the second view of the topic. So we see democracy as the power of the people in the wider term, and then sociocracy as a method of decision making and governance that help us to reach a deeper democracy. So we like to see it like that. But there are many people that define democracy as relying on majority rule. And if you limit it like that and say that democracy is based on majority rule voting, then sociocracy would be a different system, because it doesn't rely on majority voting, but in the consent of everyone of the community. And so to introduce a bit of the context of the schools and also our research, I want to introduce the 2 main principles that we identify that define what democratic education is. And Yakov already presented those topics yesterday, and we'd like to highlight the 2 first ones that he brings. The first one is democratic management. So that usually happens through school meetings with the students and staff, and everyone has an equal voice and equal power of making decisions. That's a defining principle. And the second is the students' autonomy in their learning process, which sometimes is also called self-directed education. But we like to call it like this because the term self-directed education is not always common to many people that practice democratic education, as we know here in Brazil. So we like to talk more about students' autonomy. So this, we say that this define the main 2 principles. That's how we've been introduced to democratic education in the schools we visited, and that's what we saw in common in every democratic school we visited. But I would like to bring the other topics that Yakov talked about. So Yakov also talks about, I didn't put it here, but he talks about the dialogue relationship between students and teachers and educators. But we think that this topic fits in the first 2 because the democratic management is done through dialogue, and also the students' autonomy in the learning process is done through a dialogue with the teacher. So we didn't add that as a topic, but we like to add human rights-based curriculum, as Jakob says, because we see in many democratic schools that actually don't put that into practice, and it's unfortunate because we are missing a great potential to talk about issues that affect us all as society. And as Paulo Freire would say in different words, he defends a democratic education that's based on conscientization, becoming conscious about the world and the reality and the issues of the world. So this should be fuel for discussion in schools, we believe, but we don't see that in many democratic schools that we visit, actually. So that's why we're highlighting the first two principles. And the fourth principle that we would like to add, and this is from us, we wonder how could democratic education be more inclusive? And we wonder how can a school be called democratic if it's not inclusive, if it's not free and accessible to all? Like, that's definitely the defining principle of democracy. But the reality that we see is a lot of private democratic schools, especially in Europe and the US, we see a lot. And we wanted to bring that as those two other topics as ideals of what democratic education should be like, in our opinion. And in this presentation, we're going to focus on the democratic management of the school. So sociocracy is, again, a method for the governance, for the management of the school. So that's where sociocracy enters in this aspect.
Okay, so what is sociocracy? Give a very brief history. So it started off as a philosophical idea from Auguste Comte, who's a French philosopher and one of the first sociologists. And he defined the term sociocracy in 1851. And he also popularized the term sociology. He was one of the first people to use the term sociology. And his idea was to create an advanced form of democracy by bringing in more of a scientific and arguments-based process into the democratic governance, and especially from the inspirations and research of sociology, so understanding society and the interactions of people and bringing that wisdom into the democratic process. So that's kind of the beginning. And then later on, a couple by the names of Kees Boeke and Betty Cadbury in the Netherlands, they tried to take some of these ideas and put it into a practical form. And they created the Werkplaats School. So this was the first sort of practical attempt at sociocracy. And it was one of the first democratic schools as well. Only started very soon after Summerhill in the UK. And they put into practice some form of consensus building and involving the students, project-based learning and various forms of democratic education. One of the students at this school was a man named Shread, and he was very inspired by his school. And he became an engineer, and he later inherited the business from his parents. And he used some of the ideas from his school and created some practical defining principles of sociocracy that could be applied to any organization, whether it's a school or a business or whatever.
Community.
Or a community. So what Shread did is he defined these four principles, and he distilled sociocracy as a method of governance. So he talked about the four rules of consent, circle, sociocratic selection, and double link. And what are these things? So consent essentially means no objections. And it means when a group of people all give their consent to a proposal, and then that is when the decision is made. So it means no objections are left standing.
I just would like to add that that means that is different from agreeing completely with the proposal. So we're not looking for exactly common agreement of everyone, which sometimes is not even possible. but we're asking for objections. Do you have any objection, argument against the proposal? And when people have, then the proposal it's adapted until everyone consents.
And then the next principle is the circle. So it's just a group of people who are using the consent decision-making process. And this is a group of people that are around a domain of responsibility, and they work together and make decisions together. And this can be various different domains. And an organization is essentially made up of different circles with different domains, and they have a role, like 4 different key roles in the circle. So they have a facilitator, so the process is facilitated, and they have an admin to record notes, and they have a leader and a representative. So a key point is that the process is facilitated. That's a key part of sociocracy. And these roles are selected. So the sociocratic selection is a kind of election of roles, and you're using consent. So all these roles are selected, and 2 of the main roles are the leader and the representative, and they create what's called the double link. So the double link is the feedback and communication between circles. So this is how all of those circles are linked together. So then this creates a kind of a fractal where you can have an organization that's just one circle, or you could have 1,000 circles that are all linked together with different domains of responsibility. And all these circles are kind of semi-autonomous, so they can make decisions within their domain fairly autonomously, but they're linked.
I just want to add that, as Charlie said, sociocracy can be applied in a large population. So there are designs from Gerard Endenberg and also from an organization called NCN, the Neighborhood Community Network in India, and they are creating a governance system based on sociocracy, in which the groups that meet are from the neighborhoods. So people in the neighborhoods meet in around 30 people to make decisions that affect their communities. And these circles get federated until the national level. And then you have a prime minister that was elected in all the levels sociocratically in their own communities.
Okay, so the area that kind of interests us most is this intersection between democratic education and sociocracy. So both these things can exist separately. So most democratic schools they don't use sociocracy. They use either some form of majority rule vote or consensus building or some combination. And on the other side, sociocracy is a method of governance that can be applied in any organization. It doesn't have to be a school. And there are some schools that use sociocracy, but they only use it with the staff, just with the adults. So that would not be a democratic school in our view, because a democratic school needs to involve all the students. So we're most interested in this point where it's a democratic school and they're using sociocracy. So that's what we focused our film on. So now we'll show a short video clip. It's 3 minutes, and this is from our film, our feature film. So it's going to show these kids making a decision. And this school is called De Valle Pio, and it's from the Netherlands. This is actually a state-funded school, so it's a public school. It's perhaps the only state-funded democratic school in the whole of Europe. Certainly the only one in the Netherlands. I need to check if it's the only one in Europe, but it's impressive because the head mistress, the head, she actually sued the government to be able to make a public democratic school, and she won the lawsuits. So this is an inclusive school, and it's from ages 4 up until 13, and it has about 200 students. And in this particular example, the students have been given a small budget to run an event in their school, and they're making decisions about what they want to happen in their event. And in this one, they're making a decision about whether to hire a candy floss machine, a machine for making the fluffy sugar candy floss. So let's give it a watch. And,
Where is the
oh,
sound?
can you hear the sound? Oh,
Can anyone hear the sound?
It's good. It's good.
Ah, okay. We can't hear it. That's weird.
Yeah.
But you can hear the sound of the video.
Yeah, guitar playing.
Okay. Good,
we can hear. Okay, and the subtitles in English are on.
Okay, let's give it a go. Can't hear it.
€60. De suikerspinmachine is €60, dus met alle dingen die je nodig hebt. Dus het is nu de vraag, willen we €60 besteden aan een suikerspinmachine of niet?
Ik vind het te duur en het is overbodig omdat er al superveel hapjes zijn. Maar ik vind het wel lekker, een suikerspinmachine, maar er zijn wel genoeg hapjes, maar het is wel lekker als toetje.
When you're in a circle, you can give your consent, yes or no. Consent or not consent.
Consent. Consent. Niet consent. Niet consent.
4 kinderen zeggen niet consent. Is er een manier waarop zij het voorstel kunnen aanpassen?
Hoe meer, hoe beter.
Dus zodat er wel een suikerspinmachine komt, maar dat jij er wel mee tevreden kan zijn.
Ik vind dat een heel goed idee, eigenlijk wat Ida nu zegt. Dus dat we gewoon in de mail zetten, niet te veel zoete hapjes.
Ja.
Mogen wel een paar, maar niet dat de helft zoete hapjes zou zijn. En wat misschien ook nog één ding is, iedereen krijgt er één, maar één suikerspin. Niet dat kinderen constant terugkomen. Zo van
1 of 2. Als je er 2 moet, dan wel
één.
Dus je voorstel is 1 suikerspin en een meel.
Oké, en dan zou jij consent kunnen vragen. Goed, volgende. Boy, kun jij met deze aanpassing consent gaan op het voorstel?
Ja.
Super, nou hebben we die. Lieve is de volgende. Lieve, kun jij consent gaan met het voorstel?
Consent.
En dan naar Zoe.
Ja, ik vind het gewoon overbodig. Ten eerste omdat voor die €60 kun je ook, weet ik veel, ik weet niet zeker of dat kan, dag een suikerspinmachine te doen en dat je daar ook nog voor moet betalen. Ja, dat vind ik gewoon overbodig.
Met die suikerspinmachine, ik heb gezorgd dat we 200 suikerspinnen eruit kunnen krijgen. Daarom, hoe zeg je dat, dacht ik, nou, als we daar gewoon vragen 50 cent voor bijvoorbeeld, dan heb je sowieso al €100 terugverdiend. Als er 200 opgaan.
Zoe, jij zegt een zonde van het geld. Ik wil graag dat geld ergens anders aan kunnen besteden. Je hebt gehoord wat Timo zei. We kunnen vragen of mensen betalen voor een suikerspin. En op die manier het geld terugverdienen. Is daarmee jouw bezwaar opgeheven? En dan is de motie consent op deze manier. Hartstikke goed.
Lovely. So, did you manage to watch with the audio? Because for us there was no audio. Anyone? Can you hear us?
Yes, the audio was fine.
Okay.
All was perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So what we can see in the video is, as Charlie presented, the context de Valais PO school in the Netherlands, and they have this open meeting in which kids and staff can participate. And the process that they used to make decisions was basically like this. So they first present a proposal. In the case was a proposal by the students, and they presented the proposal of hiring his candy floss machine for the party. Then there is a round of questions, but we didn't see that in the video. And then there is a round of arguments. That's usually done, all of these are usually done in a round, like passing a talking stick. But in the school, as they had many students, they were raising their hands and the microphone was passing around, as you could see. And then last, there is the consent round, which is the round in which we ask objections and consent. So as you saw, the 4 kids that didn't consent with the proposal, and then the students themselves came with other proposals to add to it, so the students could consent with it. So that's how you integrate an objection. You ask, what do you need in order to consent to this proposal? And that's how we get a common decision. So what was interesting is you can see, like, the girl at the end, she gave her consent to the candy floss machine, but she was kind of rolling her eyes. You can tell that was not her preference. She perhaps preferred to use the money with something else, with an excursion, as she said. But she still gave her consent at the end, because the arguments that were given were enough to go against the arguments that she was bringing, not against, but they brought different elements. So what she said, but we could spend with something else, it's too expensive. And then they say, well, we can charge for it small amounts and still recover money and save some money afterwards. So there's nothing she could say about that, against that. So she gave her consent. And this graphic illustrates a bit how we have these areas of preference, of tolerance, and objection. So consent and sociocracy invite us to give our consent. Sociocracy invites us to give our consent when we are within this area of tolerance or preference, of course. So we can give our consent. And when we feel it's not safe enough to try, when we feel that there's some need that's not being fulfilled, a need can be a need from the individual, but also a need of the school or the organization, then we raise an objection. And these objections should be seen as a gift to the group, as a gift of wisdom, because they are what make the proposal better and contemplates everyone. But to make a decision with consent of everyone, the base is that we need to look for what is good enough for now and what is safe enough to try. So we're not trying to be perfectionists here. We try to make a decision that it can work for now, and we can also put a date and say, let's test it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then see how it goes, evaluate, and perhaps change direction. So that's it.
So just a little bit more about the process. So we saw those 3 points, and actually that represents this 3rd point here, the consent. So the group, they speak in rounds. So they first present the proposal, and then they ask questions to understand it, make their arguments, and give consent. But before that, if you're bringing in an issue,
I just want to say, so people go to the consent part of decision making once they already have a proposal formed.
Yeah. And if you don't yet have a proposal, you can bring in an issue, for example. So let's say, for example, you bring in the issue of bullying, and then you bring that into the circle. You say, okay, there's a problem here. Bullying is a problem. And first, you want to create a picture of understanding. So you do this by identifying all the elements of the issue. You sort of brainstorm what are the elements that are causing or part of this issue. And once you've understood that, then you can start generating ideas, proposal shaping, point to here. So you're generating lots of ideas. You can do that in all sorts of creative ways. And then you tune the proposal, 1 or 2 clear proposals, and then you bring that to the consent process, as we saw in the video, the little example. So this leads us to the conflict mediation circle, which is when you bring an issue, when you have an interpersonal or intrapersonal problem, of a conflict, all the schools that we visited in the Netherlands for a film, they have this beautiful process of having a conflict mediation circle. So they base this on the sociocracy process. And this is a very effective way to resolving conflict. And this brings us back to our original motivation. Is there a school or a group of schools that are overcoming punishment and punitive justice? What we saw was honestly quite amazing, because there is literally no punishment in these schools because of the conflict mediation circle. Whenever there is an issue, even if a kid breaks a window or someone hurts another person, they can bring that to the conflict mediation and find a solution that everyone can be okay with, that resolves their needs and feelings, and they can consent with something that works for the community and them. So this was a great example that shows us how it is possible to create an effective restorative justice process. So the last main sort of point we want to cover is the circle structure. So when you have these circles, which are essentially a group of people that are around a area of responsibility. So here's the little people here in one circle, and they are connected, as we said, through this double link. So you have your leader and your representative, or in some cases just two representatives. And here you can see these two representatives from these other circles, and they make up the bigger circle. So from this basic rules, you can have all sorts of different structures. You can have a huge diversity of sociocratic structures. And we're going to just show you a couple of examples from what we've seen.
Yeah, it's just important to say that not many schools that we've seen practice the double link principle. In the film, we show 6 schools, and 5 of them have an open meeting, like the one we just saw in the film, in which it's optional and anyone can come and participate. But there is one school that practices the double linking, which is one of the principles of sociocracy. And we'd like to share with you the structure of this school. So as you can see here on the right, this is the circle structure. They have the school circle here in blue in the middle. And in the school circle participates in the case they elect 2 representatives from the students, 2 representatives from the parents, 2 representatives from the teachers, and 2 representatives from the teaching and non-teaching staff members.
Students, right?
Yeah, and the students, of course, 2 representatives of students. So this image on the left is the school circle of the Vrijdomte in action. So you see there are only 8 people here. Should be 8 people there. But all the circles are connected. So I'm going to present the structure in a bit bigger for you to visualize. So here we can see the school circle with all those members, representatives. And here we have the student circle, which also elects 2 representatives to go to the school circle. And in this school, what they noticed was that the children from different ages were not feeling very comfortable expressing themselves in some situations among people from different ages. So they actually noticed that there was different needs for different age groups. And although the school it's run democratically and the children can choose when they go to classes, what they want to do with their time, and they also work in mixed ages in the lessons. For decision making, they broke down into smaller circles. So we have a circle of 4 to 6 year olds, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, and so it goes. But it's also important to say that the students can choose which group they are in. So there is a 13-year-old in the group of 16 to 18 years old, for example, because this student thought that he would fit better there. So that's also fine. The important thing is that with this structure, what this structure allows is that everyone participates. because every Monday they have the Monday circles where the smaller groups of the students meet, and it's expected everyone participates in the meetings. It's not compulsory, you're not going to be punished if you don't go, anything like that. But it's kind of an agreement, a ritual of the school that everyone goes to the meetings once a week. And so it's the only school that we've seen that everyone is engaging the decision making relates referent to their area of responsibility. So for example, the students here can make decisions concerning the students. So decisions that don't affect the other members of the school, they can make here, and they don't need to take that to the school circle. And also with the smaller groups, if they have other kind of conflicts or issues that affect only the smaller groups, they deal with that in the smaller groups. So this is one example of structure. And Devalab PO, the school that we show in the video, they have a different structure we're going to show to you now. And they don't use double links, which is how most of the schools do it. So they have an open school circle here for everyone in the community to join. And they also have small committees like the gardening circle, communication circle, study circle, animal circles, laboratory circle, many sub-circles, which are also open to the students to participate. But there are no double links. There are no two people connecting the school circle to those groups. So we put them here, but they are not double linked. And these schools also have mentoring circles between the student, the parent, and the teacher. So they do these conversations here, but again, there's no double link. And then there is the educator circle and the admin circle, and then the board here, usually connected to the admin circle. But as you see, there's no double links because the circle is open, the school circle is open to everyone. And just a third structure to illustrate perhaps how sociocracy could be put into a state, traditional school even. The school can be organized into the group circles, which can be the classrooms, the group of students with the teacher. And they do democratic decision making. That's how I used to do when I was in the state school in Brazil. I used to do this democratic meeting with the students in the classroom. And then a teacher and a student go to the school circle. So you have all the groups, all the classrooms represented here, and all the teachers. And then you have here the teacher circle just for the teachers, and the admin circle for the admin, and the board of him. And it's important to say in sociocracy, the board should actually have a different role from the board of directors. It shouldn't be just a board of directors. There are externals from the school that have just executive decisions and don't integrate the students in that decision. We actually seen in the Vrijruimte a student. So if you go back here to the Vrijruimte structure, the first one, actually there is a student here in the board who was elected from the school circle to the board. So the idea is that you have a representative from the students in the board together with the head teacher, and people from the community and experts, perhaps in democratic education, sociocracy, to compose this board to hold the vision of the school. So that's the purpose of having a board.
To connect to the community and environment, right?
Yeah.
So just a few conclusions from what we've seen in the schools we visited. So we've seen that, yeah, sociocracy within a democratic education context is an effective method of governance that can include all the voices. It really does do a good job of including all the voices, and especially inclusion of minorities. And this also creates more sustainable decisions because you're listening to everyone and integrating these objections, this decision can last longer. It kind of has a more stable base because everybody gave their consent to it, so that you're very rarely left with someone that's like grumbling, like, oh, I didn't vote on that. That's not what I wanted. I'm unhappy with that. So it's more sustainable. And one of the greatest benefits we've seen is this overcoming of punitive justice. Of course, there are other methods to do that, like different ways of restorative justice. And the method that we've seen using the sociocracy way works very well for creating a non-punishment culture. It does seem to do a good job of overcoming, especially polarization, and there's very little or to no segregation, very little to no bullying, very occasionally, and if there is, it's brought up in the conflict mediation circle. And there's very little to no competition because the culture is being created around a cooperative culture. There is no one group against another group or my idea against your idea. It's a co-collaborative, co-creative and cooperative process, which can be very beautiful. And because of this, it really taps into collective intelligence, bringing all sorts of creative ideas, which is brilliant. Not to say that these don't happen in like other democratic schools. We've also seen lots of brilliant creative ideas, and many of these things overcome. But we've seen in the sociocracy can be perhaps can help overcome some of these things very well. Some potential limitations is that because of like the listening to everyone and because of this process, there really is like a maximum of about 30 people in a circle to hold the process. Sometimes when it's an open circle and lots of people join in, it kind of breaks down, the process breaks down a little bit, and you come back to just sort of raising hands. So it's best to break out into smaller circles.
And can I just say something about that? So many schools actually, they like the idea of having a big open school circle for everyone. So that could still be done. For example, having a big school circle with everyone to raise issues, to raise proposals, to dialogue on certain things. But then the important thing is that when we're making the decisions and going through the decision-making process, that's done in smaller groups and to make sure that we are hearing everyone. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it can take more time to listen to everyone because you're deliberately listening to everyone. But as you say, if you break into smaller groups, that resolves that issue.
And also, when people start getting to practice it, in the beginning, it takes more time.
Yeah.
But once you have a good facilitator and people are used to the process, what happens a lot is that things start being said in the circle, and then when it moves to you, you realize, oh, everything that I wanted to say was already said, so I don't have to add anything. And that happens a lot in a circle. You hear the first people, and then the others might say, wow, actually everything I wanted to say was covered, and then that also moves really quickly.
Yeah. One of the main limitations is that it really does require training, and especially for adults, it requires a level of unlearning. So I mean, for adults in our society, it's easy to pick up a kind of majority rule because we're used to like, who agrees with this, who doesn't agree, and we have a discussion, a debate. It's natural to us, but to follow this process of really listening to every single person, giving them the space, and really feeling what an objection and consent is in your body, this does require training and practice. So this can be a limitation, and it is not very quick to start. You need to go through a process of introducing it to overcome some of these sort of cultural baggages that we come with.
And said that, it's just interesting how children learn very easily sociocracy. We've seen kids doing it like so quick and intuitively, and the adults struggle because we, as Charlie said, raising this culture, and we are so used to having meetings there. People talk on top of each other and things like that. So
yeah, this comes down to some of the stuff that we've been talking about in here of like some of the more dominant voices, quiet voices being left out, minority voices being left out. Like it requires unlearning to be able to listen to all those voices in an equitable way.
That connects to the next slide. We're going to show a bit more about where you can find more information about sociocracy. And so here there is our website, Wandering School website, for everyone who wants to know more about our project, and the School Circles film website here as well. You can watch the whole film if you want. And then about resources about sociocracy, we recommend Sociocracy for All because they put a lot of free resources online that you can look. So although it requires training, you can also do that for free. You can do that for free. Our film has a small cost, €5 to rent, 10 euros to purchase and watch. But we think that after watching our film, you're already able to put in practice some things that you've seen in the film. So we made the film to be a training resource, to be a pedagogical resource. And then Sociocracy for All puts a lot of different videos online as well, explaining how it works. There are a lot of free webinars and events. So there's no lack of opportunities to learn more if you want.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's it, right? So we should have a little bit of time
for questions. How long do we have for questions, Stephanie?
So, we can continue with questions from the participants, conference participants right now. If anybody has any questions, or if anyone's been familiar with Sociocracy, if they've seen it, what their reflections, their thoughts are on what they've seen Marie and Charlie present right now. It's so wonderful to see kids organizing in this way and really having true voice and true influence over the decisions that affect them. And we're so grateful to the two of you in particular who have made this part of your mission to look at the many different options throughout the world. And I know you'll continue to do it as well. And to see that, I think maybe Jim Flannery said it earlier today, we call it alternative education. We call, and we're put on the weekends. You're looking at all these different democratic school learning environments. And we've put them under the same umbrella as alternative, learning environments. They're also different. I mean, I know that from my own experience, and probably most of the people on this call know that even the under the guise of alternative education and democratic schools, they're each so different. So we're gonna take questions or conversation from the audience. When that seems to be complete, we'll move on to the next session. But so valuable, your insights, your research, your travels, your meeting all the different people and learning how effective ways to organize ourselves, or for the children to organize themselves and to be able to address the issues that are most important to them, affecting them and their community. Thank you so much. So lovely. And we know that we'll continue our relationship with you over the next years to come.
Ed has a question, and then I think Marcia does. And that's all I see right now. Ted and Marcia.
Charlie and Mari, I think you posted something on Friday about Robert's Rules of Order being a Western and American concept. But if you read my book, my question is, do you think there's the possibility that what we are talking about is not adversarial, that we can come to a meeting of the minds, that Robert's Rules of Order and sociocracy may be able to live together? And I have a second question, and that is, have you read about the intimidating things that exist when people have to conform to a consensus, where they feel intimidated and they give in when they really don't believe in what they're ultimately giving into? And lastly, do you realize that if you write in your bylaws that you are going to operate by consensus, you can live with Robert's Rules of Order and also live with consensus at the same time? I'm done.
Great, thanks for that. So your first point, Yeah, I think they can coexist. I think both of us are advocates of diversity, of trying different ways of making decisions and creating communities together. Essentially, the point is to listen to all the voices and try and come up with equitable ways of collaboration and creating harmonious communities. So as long as we keep that at the core, I don't think there's a perfect system, but we can keep trying different systems out. And I would like to read your book for sure.
And about the second question, if people might feel a bit pressure to give their consent. To be fair, we've seen sometimes that happening. Most of the time, people give their consent easily. It's sometimes there are cases that people, for example, in the film, we talk about roller skating issue in the school. There was some kids roller skating and hitting each other and making people dropping their things, and it was a bit of a mess. And they talked about it. And there was one student that thought that you shouldn't be roller skating in the school at all. And all the other students thought it's okay to do it only on Fridays in this saloon. And this child apparently was really resisting to it and saying, no, I think we shouldn't, I think we shouldn't. And until there was a point that he got tired and said, okay, I agree with you, then okay, I can give my consent. So that can happen after a long time of discussion if people are tired. But again, if you, and that's something for us to, for all of us to learn, because we are attached to our preferences as well. And so that's when the facilitator should bring the good enough, safe enough to try to the table and say, can we live with this for 2 weeks, and then we reassess. And so it's always trying to make this negotiations, you know, for everyone to give consent. If that's done well, then everyone can leave a meeting feeling resolved.
Yeah,
and that's great.
Again, this comes to the limitation that we highlighted, which is that it requires unlearning and training to really understand what an objection is, because it's different from an agreement. It's not a unanimous agreement, so it's difficult to kind of to feel and get your head around this difference between giving your consent and having a unanimous agreement. They're two different things, and they can be easily confused. So this is one of the limitations of having to overcome our culture of kind of what we've been conditioned to understand. Is like, is this a unanimous agreement? No, it's not. You're giving your objection to something that does not work for you. And it really is about creating a culture of accepting objections. And that's a limitation because that's difficult to achieve. It's difficult to create this genuine culture. But it is possible.
Thank you. Marcia, I believe you're next.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to pass I'll shelve my question for later. So I'll pass to the next person. Thomas.
Okay. I'm smiling. I just want to say big thanks, Charlie and Marie, for all your easy to see passion and love of all this, to all the level of effort. I was lucky to spend some time as a staff person at a Sudbury school. So I've got some real keen insight into what is relied on there, right? And so I'll just share real quick here, and I'm not even sure it's a question, but in the democracy of the Sudbury school, the actual majority vote takes a very small slice of the entire system, right? And which includes the Robert's Rules of Order, parliamentary process. You got to get items on the agenda a week in advance, and how you run the meetings. And then you got a rule book, and you got a judicial process, which is not punitive at all. So much of what you're celebrating is what happens inside the democracy of the Sudbury School already. We're all reaching consensus. However, what we're not doing in the Sudbury School is protecting from the messiness of democracy. It's the world of politics, and they're not happy, but it's their choice of how to engage or not engage. So I see that being the difference, and it's not even a question, it's just an awareness that possibly this sociocracy is a way of protecting the young people in a way that we're not able to protect adults in their own level of society. This is just an observation.
Can I come in for some time?
There are more people.
Well,
Stephanie?
can we follow? We said Neera, Sky, and Rita, and then I see Derry and Srinivas, you want to speak as well. So is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Neera.
Hi, I just have a question. Thank you. That's a great film. If I were still teaching, I'd be showing it in my classes. So when I was teaching high school, I tried to create a self-teaching classroom, and my joke was always, you know, that if I weren't, you know, someone should be able to walk into the room and not know who the teacher is. There's just a whole bunch of, and I was trying to do it. At one point, I left my classroom 5 minutes early with a grade 12 class and asked them to turn off the lights when they left. It was a Friday, and I was called to the principal's office the next Monday morning and relieved of my teaching duties for a few days. I was told, in fact, not for a few days, for the rest of that month, which was the end of the school year, which precipitated my early retirement. I went back for a following year and then retired in June 2019. I couldn't believe what was happening there. Like a group of grade 12s who I had trained to really teach themselves on this kind of model with circles of expertise. And so there's a really long way to go where I'm standing, because I was literally relieved of my duties. I don't know if they thought I was a threat to the students, if it was a safety issue. They thought I was suffering from some illness and couldn't be entrusted, but it was amazing to me that that was their response. When I was working at the board, I came across the ideas of Margaret Wheatley, Leadership in the New Science, and I'm working in the Green Party, and we're experimenting, a small group of us, with something called holacracy, this theory of self-organizing systems and lateral organization. And you know, Leadership in the New Science is the book that she came and spoke to our school board about. Although I tell my little story about leaving the class because I tried to implement some of that innocently when I went back to the classroom, and clearly they didn't want us walking any of that talk. They were spending thousands of dollars to bring in consultants to teach us about. So have you heard, so my question is just, is sociocracy, it sounds like the same thing that Margaret Wheatley talks about in her book for organizations, and that we are using the Green Party as holacracy.
Yeah, so actually holacracy, Brian Robertson, who developed holacracy,
right?
He was a trained sociocracy consultant. So holacracy is just a rebranding of sociocracy with some changes to be more of an agile business model. So it's very much related, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Srinivas.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great job, Charlie and Mary. Wonderful that you've done here. I'm able to see the effort that you put in. And well, in democracy, you know that when majority wins, minority dies. And they will have to compromise for the rest of the 5 years period or whatever. And in sociocracy, again, there is this issue of when a certain number is moving to a certain idea, there is a possibility that the rest of them also may start flocking. Though not everybody, they'll have a tendency to flock, right? So that is also a problem that could arise when effective sociocracy is not implemented there. And I'm always of the fundamental thought that be it democracy or sociocracy or whatever, society's consciousness has to keep on rising. Unless and until the consciousness is attempted to be awakened and we arise, we improve upon that. No element of any efforts that we put in may not get us the effective results, point number one. And the second one is that this rise in consciousness should match with the natural and the eternal principles. And unless we do something like that, this world will not be moving in the directions that we are all envisaging and wanting to keep progressing on. So since you already touched democracy and sociocracy, can you add a little more on consciousness with natural and eternal principles to make it a holistic holistic completion. Can I have your views on this?
Sure. I agree with you like 99%.
Where is the 1.1% difference?
So, no system of governance is perfect, right? We, of course, as you say, there is going to be herd mentality. We're going to have the conditioning of conformity. Of course, there's human beings, and it's going to take maybe another 1,000 years before we truly overcome these problems. The 1% is that I do think systems I think changing the rules of the system do also help to develop consciousness. So I think there's a feedback loop between the system that's in place and the level of consciousness that we're at. And I do see that when you create a system, which is, for example, a talking stick, like this, listen to everyone's point of view, that really does shift consciousness. It's saying we are listening to everyone right now. We're not going to ignore anybody. So that process shift is a shift in consciousness, in my view.
Wonderful. Well, I've understood your current consciousness and your vision. May I also know what is your larger vision, if any?
A larger vision of
your larger vision of life.
Okay. Well,
Your vision.
I have a big vision of life, but in related to education, as we said, a greater vision is learning communities, practicing and liberating education, and this liberating education being, as in essence, raising consciousness about the world, about ourselves, about others. So I think that's the essence for me, when we becoming conscious while we act and engage with the world. So that's the education I believe, and I've been
just the point.
working to
Very much love connect with you. Kindly share your mail IDs, please.
There was more people with questions though, isn't it?
Yeah, there's Rita and then Derry.
I just thank you for your presentation. It was beautiful and inspiring and informative. And I just wanted to share that 20 years ago, I was part of a school for 10 years called Pacifica Community Charter School in Los Angeles, California, in the United States. And it was a public school. It was a charter school, but we practiced what you're calling sociocracy. So I'm excited to know that there was a name for it. So everything that you were showing, I was just so full of joy seeing that, because we were doing that. A little bit of a difference though was that we had the older children facilitate those meetings. And so adults would be there if they needed help, but you know, we had the older students call those meetings, manage those meetings. And it was a beautiful thing. And in 2010, that school lost its charter. And now it's coming back in vogue to have that. And the school that I'm in now is practicing Robert's Rules of Order, speaking to Ted. And we're including students of all ages, parents, staff, board members. So it is beautiful and it can be done. I think you just have to want it. You want it for your community. And that makes the difference, you know, that awareness that it's something we want. So how can we make it happen? So I just want to say thank you. I love this project. It's beautiful.
Thank you. And just one observation based on what you just said. In the video, we show an adult facilitating the meeting. That's how it works in that school, because they also have younger kids mixed with older. But in all the other schools, the students facilitate the meetings as well, and they are elected sociocratically to do so.
Derry had a
Derry.
point. You're on mute, Barry.
Yeah, sorry, my old finger shakes a bit and getting it on the button's not so easy. Every time I hear you guys, I love it, and I get more persuaded to your point of view every time I hear you. And that was a beautiful presentation. Thank you. And I probably would have tried it with small groups if I was still working with kids, persuaded by you. A lot of the meetings I was involved with young people were much bigger groups than that, sometimes 150, 180 even. And there we adopted the procedure of never making an important decision the first time round, but always giving people time to think about it, talk about it, develop their arguments, and then finally make a decision the second time. There was still a lot of difference even the third time. So I don't know whether you think that's of any value. An offer I'd like to make to you, I don't know if you know this, but Kees Booker's school, the Werkplaats, after the Second World War became a regular school, and it just became another authoritarian state-funded school. But in the last 4 years, the management has changed and they're trying to rediscover their roots. And the first thing they did was when they got a capital grant to build a new school building, the whole building was designed between the architects and the kids. And the brief the kids gave the architects is, we want a school building that's nothing like a school. And a person I know quite well is actually researching the effect of participation in the building design, what effect it's had on the kids. And I'm invited to visit the school in the next few months, if we can, to talk to the staff. Would you like to come with me?
Yes.
Make a film.
Yeah.
Yay, that's great.
That's great.
Yeah, when we were in the Netherlands, we heard of the school, the Werkplaats, and we wanted to go there. We called them and they said, it's just a regular school. I don't know why you're interested in us.
Too busy.
They need you to remind them what they should be like.
Yeah, we were like, we don't practice sociocracy. No, what's that?
I'd like to thank again Marie and Charlie for our eye opener. For some of us, sociocracy, we're hearing about it for the first time. For some of us, we know a little bit about it, or we're doing it, but we didn't necessarily know its name or its connection to democratic principles and its relationship maybe to Robert's Order of Rules as well. All a very interesting conversation and lots of good participation from everybody. I'm going to hand the conference over to Liz to continue with the afternoon. And thank you again, Marie and Charlie.